Namaskaram to all our viewers throughout the world. We welcome you to this workshop on meditation as psychological intervention, hosted by American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. This is one of the series of workshops and webinars as part of the International Yoga Conference 2021, hosted through the month of June on the occasion of International Yoga Day. For our viewers who are joining us for the first time, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. American Academy of Yoga and Meditation, AAYM, is a non-profit organization for physicians, researchers, medical professionals, and practitioners of yoga and meditation. The organization is dedicated to education and research in the field of yoga and meditation by fostering an interdisciplinary approach of linking science, arts, ethics, and spiritualism to improve the ways of human life. Meditation is proved to be effective in emotional management, pain tolerance, cardiovascular health, parasympathetic engagement, connectedness with nature, social well-being, mental hygiene, intellectual acuity, to name but a few. However, meditation-based practice have wider potential as psychological intervention and can be applied for wholesome well-being in the general population, especially in the recent times of pandemic. The eminent speakers in this webinar will present their views and the latest developments in the field and answer questions from the audience. I am honored to introduce our moderator for this webinar, Dr. Rajashree. Dr. Rajashree is an associate professor in psychiatry and a consultant psychiatrist at Vedanta Center for Healing Minds, Salt Lake, Kolkata, India. I hand over you the spotlight to Dr. Rajashree. Welcome, Dr. Rajashree.
Good morning, and thank you, Krishnaji, for your kind introductions. Namaskar, everyone across the world. I am Rajashree, and it is my very esteemed honor to be the moderator for today's a very important topic, really. Psychosocial intervention, meditation as a psychosocial intervention. We realize that modern day research is going at a pace where in the field of yoga, there is an immense requirement to foster an interdisciplinary approach. And we're trying our very best to link the principles of metaphysics, arts, creativity, ethical issues, resilience, and spiritualism, all for the purpose of improving the lives of human beings across the world. We do realize that meditation-based practices have a very wide potential as a psychosocial intervention and really can be applied for a wholesome well-being in the general population because it has an immense potential to transform or rather have a psychophysiological transformation, the way the science behind yoga is unfolding over a period of time. Without much without much further ado, I would like to now introduce our three extremely eminent speakers who are participating from three parts of the world this morning. I'm in India now, it's in morning here. Our first speaker for today will be Dr. Erica Thomas, who is an assistant professor in education and wellness at the Elon University in North Carolina. Erica has completed her MA and PhD from the Wayne State University in Detroit, and her scholarly interests include health promotion and practice, workplace health culture, and focuses on physical activity promotion during the school day and work day. She's also a certified personal trainer and a certified health education specialist. Our second speaker, who is going to be Michaela Posco, who's a senior postdoctorate research fellow at the Victoria University, Australia, and her research expertise are in mental health, mindfulness, physical activities, stress, and science communication. And finally, we have none other than Professor Shivarama Varambally, who is a professor of psychiatry and head of the Department of Integrative Medicine at the NIMHANS. Dr. Varambally has been awarded with the prestigious doctorate in science in yoga by the Swami Vivekananda Yoga Anushantan Shanasthan. He is also a recipient of several awards for excellence in teaching and leads the Integrative Center at NIMHANS. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's uh, webinar is going to mainly focus on a variety of topics related to mindfulness, the attitude of mindfulness, differences of mindlessness and mindfulness, dimensions of well-being, and we'll carry over to stress and how mindfulness impacts on the stress responses in our brain and general well-being, and how mindfulness meditation and meditation in principle can improve our mental health. We talk in details about the default brain networks and also how the possible mechanisms underlying the effects of meditation by protecting the brain by the immense potential of neuroplasticity. So, the first speaker for this morning is Dr. Erica, and she will be talking on the topic about the mindfulness in everyday life using the dimensions of wellness to incorporate mindfulness. Welcome, Erica. Over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm going to get us started this evening or this morning, depending on where you are, with some basic understandings of mindfulness, techniques, and application to everyday life. Next slide, please. First, let's start with a definition of mindfulness. Mindfulness has two key ingredients, awareness and acceptance. John Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as having four major components. It's paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. It does take practice to be able to incorporate all of these components. Achieving just one is not wrong, but it takes practice to achieve the others. For example, you may be able to pay attention on purpose by sitting and meditating, but you still may have a lot of judgment about the thoughts that are coming in while meditating. It takes patience and practice to gain acceptance of these thoughts. Meditation is just one type of mindfulness practice, which we'll hear about in other talks this evening. And then we'll talk about other types of practice as well. So some key takeaways just in the beginning to remember throughout is that mindfulness has many components. There is no end point. Mindfulness takes practice over a lifetime. Mindfulness can be practiced and achieved by everyone. Next slide, please. The easy way to think about how to be mindful is to learn the 8 attitudes of mindfulness. You can think about having these during your mindful practice, but also in everyday life. So the first is to have a beginner's mind. This quality of awareness sees things as new and fresh, as if for the first time, with a sense of curiosity. The second is non-judgment. This involves cultivating impartial observation in regard to any experience. So you're not labeling thoughts, feelings, or sensations as good or bad, right or wrong, fair or unfair, but simply taking note of thoughts, feelings, or sensations in each moment. The third is acknowledgement. This quality of awareness validates and acknowledges things as they are. The fourth is non-striving. With this quality of awareness, there's no grasping, no aversion to change, or movement away from whatever arises in the moment. So in other words, non-striving means not trying to get anywhere other than where you are. The fifth is equanimity. And this involves balance and fosters wisdom. It allows a deep understanding of the nature of change and allows you to be with change with greater insight and compassion. The sixth is letting be. With this quality of awareness, you can simply let things be as they are with no need to try to let go of whatever is present. The seventh is self-reliance. This quality of awareness helps you see for yourself from your own experience what is true or untrue. And the last is self-compassion. This quality of awareness cultivates love for yourself as you are without self-blame or criticism. Next slide, please. There are a few myths about mindfulness and meditation, about what it is or is not. So mindfulness is not necessarily about having a completely clear mind with no thoughts. Mindfulness is being aware of what current thoughts you do have. So it could be about slowing down your thoughts, seeing your thoughts, feeling your emotions, taking note of all that is happening instead of sitting idly by while your thoughts take over. Mindfulness is not mindlessness, so not just scrolling through social media or binging Netflix. Remember, mindfulness takes energy, thought, and is done with purpose. It is not passive, it is active. Mindfulness is also not always being happy and positive. It is feeling and expressing all emotions. Next slide, please. Higher levels of wellness are associated with outcomes that result from mindfulness practice, such as increased awareness, growth, and optimism. There is no wellness endpoint. It is continuous throughout our life cycle. Wellness is the active pursuit to understand and fulfill your individual human needs, which allows you to reach a state where you are flourishing and able to realize your full potential in all aspects of life. Every person has wellness aspirations. Next slide. Which brings us to the dimensions of wellness. Humans are multidimensional, so there are various dimensions to our wellness journey as well. There are many different wellness models that exist, and today I will just talk about 6 general areas that are seen across many models. All the dimensions of wellness are equally important, and we can work on them simultaneously. There's also overlap between many, if not all, of the dimensions, so we do not have to think of them as independent from each other. You will not be 100% complete or compliant in all dimensions at one time, so we ebb and flow in different dimensions at different times, just as our mindfulness practice will be better at some times than others. We can infuse mindfulness practice into each dimension of wellness. So mindfulness is a way to be in the present, accept who you are, that you are good enough as you are, and become aware of your needs in each of these dimensions. Next slide, please. So let's talk about each of the dimensions and how you can practice mindfulness in each of them. So physical wellness is recognizing the need for physical activity, healthy foods, and sleep, as well as preventing illness and injury or managing chronic health conditions. You can practice mindfulness in this dimension many ways, but a couple of examples are mindful eating and mindful walking. Mindful eating entails paying attention to your food, chewing slowly, sitting while you eat, only eating, so not multitasking as many of us can do. Mindful walking entails paying attention to your surroundings rather than to your destination or to your thoughts. So only walking, not multitasking on a device or doing something else, experiencing your environment and your senses. Emotional wellness is the ability to successfully handle life stresses and adapt to change in difficult times. You can practice mindfulness in this dimension by learning to identify a range of emotions, where you feel them in your body, how your body and mind responds to them. You could also identify defense mechanisms you use to avoid strong feelings of anger or fear. You could also identify your boundaries. What types of things elicit a physiological response or make you uncomfortable? So paying attention to those things. Intellectual wellness is recognizing one's creative abilities and finding ways to expand knowledge and skills. You can practice mindfulness in this dimension by reframing, so thinking about situations more positively or more realistically. You can also work on this dimension by periodically setting goals in different areas of your life and reassessing those goals at a previously set point in time. Next slide. Social wellness is the ability to connect with others and maintain strong relationships. You can practice mindfulness in this dimension by practicing active listening. So facing the person that you're speaking to or listening to, no multitasking or distractions, maybe repeat back some things that they're saying to you. You can also practice wellness in this area by enforcing those boundaries that you set in emotional wellness. And you can practice by saying no to things that do not bring you fulfillment or that make you uncomfortable. Occupational wellness is maintaining an optimal attitude and capacity to perform and produce work that contributes to one another's quality of life. So this is more than just a job or getting pay. You can practice mindfulness in this dimension by identifying your values and interests, line up your career with those values and the things that make you who you are. And finally, spiritual wellness provides us with systems of faith, beliefs, values, ethics, principles, and morals. Spiritual wellness does not have to be tied to an organized religion. Spiritual wellness is having a sense of purpose and a feeling of belonging in the world. You can practice mindfulness in this dimension by engaging in meditation and practicing gratitude and forgiveness. Gratitude is being thankful, privileged, lucky, or appreciative of who and what you have. You can keep a gratitude journal or practice saying or writing to people who influence your life for the better. Forgiveness is the ability to let go of hurts, grudges, or annoyances. Forgiveness is not about forgetting or condoning. Rather, it is the act of letting go of the energy and ill effects of reactive stress brought on by harboring past hurts and disappointments. This can free up energy for more proactive activities. Next slide. Behavior change is hard and complicated. So the best way to incorporate a new behavior is to make it a habit. Try to incorporate mindfulness into some part of your day, maybe 3 to 5 minutes each day. While meditation does have the best proven benefits, and you're going to hear more about that in the next two talks, for well-being, many other mindfulness practices can contribute to wellness and overall well-being. So practice in different dimensions using some of the suggestions provided. Incorporate mindfulness into activities you already do each day. So for instance, something as simple as taking a shower. When you're in the shower, actually think about the experience of the water on your skin, the soap in your hair. Be present rather than thinking about your activities for the day or rushing through the process to get to the next thing on your to-do list. Practicing mindfulness should not bring more stress. Let the practice be for you what you need it to be, what your body and mind can handle at that time. If that means it is just 3 minutes of alone time or quiet time, let it be that. Your practice will evolve and it can elicit different feelings on different days. There is no wrong way to practice mindfulness. If you're practicing, you're doing it right. So it's worth just trying. Notice small changes in how you react to people and moments in everyday life after you begin incorporating mindfulness practices. Most importantly, know that the benefits of taking this small amount of time each day are enough to justify taking that time. So lastly, remember the 4 elements of mindfulness when practicing: paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Thank you for your time and thank you for having me today.
Fantastic. What a great start to this morning, Erica. You have filled this space up with so much of positivity and linked up beautifully the elements of mindfulness or meditative purposes and how they impact on our physical, emotional, intellectual, social, occupational, and spiritual dimensions. It's a full 360 degrees impact on our lives. And as you said, this should not cause us any stress. So it should just come very naturally to us as we live everyday life. It teaches us goal settings, enforcing boundaries, identifying people, our emotions, and really be with ourselves. The perfect recipe to live, be happy, and make others happy, I would have thought. So thank you, Erica. And I guess the next talk that we have this morning by none other than Michaela Costco, and unfortunately, she has not been able to join us from Australia, but has very kindly sent us her pre-recorded presentation. And I always think doing a pre-recorded presentation is a much tougher task. So thank you for that, Dr. Costco. And her topic is really on stress and mindfulness. So let's have a listen to what Dr. Costco sends her message to us. Over to the recording, please. Kindly take over. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. My name is Michaela Pascoe. I am a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Health and Sport at Victoria University. And today I'm going to talk to you about mindfulness and stress. So there's a few things we'll cover today. The first is about how stress can contribute to mental health problems. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how mindfulness impacts stress and the stress response. And the third thing we'll cover is how mindfulness can improve our mental health, which of course I think we're all familiar with, but we'll take a little bit of a look at how and why. So we're all familiar with stress. We've all experienced it in one way or another. throughout our lives. But what is stress actually? Stresses are anything that essentially disrupt our homeostasis. And stress is an adaptive response. And so essentially is in place to help increase our survival when we respond to these things that impact our homeostasis. So this might be, for example, if you're crossing the street and a car comes running at you at very high speed. The car is the stressor. And the stress response is what happens in the body to help remove us from that situation. So we have changes that occur in our body, like an increase in heart rate, an increase in blood pressure. Our pupils dilate, so we let more light in. We have a rush of blood to the muscles so that we have more oxygen available so that we can remove ourselves quickly. And while this stress response is very beneficial in terms of helping keeping us alive, it can also have some detrimental impacts if it's activated or very common occurring over a long period of time. So ongoing high levels of stress can result in very high levels of stress hormones or hormones that are produced in response to a stressful event. And one of these is cortisol. Now, the reason this happens is because usually under a stress response, when cortisol reaches a certain level in the blood, we get a little feedback response or mechanism in the brain that says, okay, it's now time to stop producing this cortisol. But if we have very high levels or ongoing stressors, then essentially that response or that feedback loop becomes disrupted and it requires more and more cortisol in order to have that same shut-off response. Now, the problem with this is that high levels of cortisol can actually result in damage to brain regions that are involved in the regulation of mood and emotion. And when we have high levels of cortisol, we see things like increases in symptoms of depression and increases in symptoms of anxiety. And that's also correlating or corresponding with changes in these brain regions that seem to be impacted by the level of cortisol availability. Now, we're all familiar in one way or another with yoga practice. Maybe we've just heard the word, maybe we're regular practitioners ourselves. Yoga has been used in many countries and for many thousands of years, more recently in the West and in the context of mental health. It's been used as a way to improve mental health or decrease poor mental health. It's been shown to be effective for the treatment of depression in individuals that have depression. It's been shown to be effective in reducing symptoms of anxiety, and it's also been shown to reduce symptoms of self-reported stress. And the same is true for meditation. Now, of course, there's many forms of meditation, and how we define meditation is a little bit controversial, or the different forms of meditation. There is some disagreement in the literature and between different research groups. But a common way to do it is looking at meditation forms as being concentrative mindfulness or transcendental. Now, while these different forms of meditation, concentrative meaning we focus our attention on a particular object, mindful meaning that we don't try to bring our attention constantly back to a particular point of focus, but instead observe the stream of consciousness as it goes forth. And transcendental is probably a little bit more related to concentrative, but the cognitive load of the object that we pull our attention back to is meant to be very low so that we can transcend that concentrative aspect to try and get to some state of calm or a spiritual experience. And different forms of meditation have been shown to decrease symptoms of depression, anxiety, and pain. And some forms of meditation seem to recruit common brain areas, and other forms of meditation seem to recruit unique brain areas. So they're not all the same in terms of how they impact the brain. In terms of how they impact stress, there's been a whole lot of literature that's looked at some of these stress responses that we were talking about before: systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, resting heart rate, and cortisol. And I'd like to take you through a little bit of these. So one study looked at individuals who were in university and had high levels of depression symptoms at baseline. They also had high levels of self-reported stress. And these individuals were randomized in this study to one of three groups. One was a mindful yoga exercise program, which is essentially more of a traditional or a holistic yoga practice. Another was yoga as exercise, which was essentially just looking at the asana of yoga, but without any sort of philosophical or breathing or meditative experiences at all. They just, the researchers just tried to pull it back to a very physical-based practice. And the last group actually looked at, that it was a control group where people just didn't engage in anything. And in this study, they found that both yoga programs decreased symptoms of self-reported symptoms of depression and also decreased people's levels of self-reported stress. They also found that the mindful yoga group compared to the non-mindful yoga group also decreased symptoms of anxiety and, interestingly enough, decreased cortisol, which is that stress hormone we were talking about before that can have a negative impact on brain regions involved in the regulation of mood and emotion. So what this seems to indicate to us is that the mindful yoga group tended to decrease stress, both in terms of how people were experiencing stress, but also actually decrease stress in terms of the physiological or the bodily response or bodily stress levels. And we see this through the change in cortisol. So this impact on stress seems to be quite unique to the mindful component of yoga, rather than just the physical benefits of engaging in a yoga practice. So the next So the next thing I'd like to talk about is the default mode network. And the default mode network is a brain region that is implicated in our mental health and well-being. It is essentially the brain network or region that is active when we're not really doing anything or engaging anything. It's active when we're at rest, when we're daydreaming, when we're not focusing our attention on anything in particular or engaging in any certain task. And this is a very important brain region in terms of mental health because default mode network activity or connectivity is shown to be higher in people that have poor mental health, like increased symptoms of depression. And meditation is shown to decrease activity in this default mode network. Now, the reason for this is because meditation practices tend to activate an area of the brain associated with engaging in a task, the task positive network. And when one of these brain networks is active, the task positive network, it means that the default mode network is not active. So by engaging in activities that focus our attention like meditation does, we deactivate this default mode network. And the default mode network has been very closely tied to rumination, which is essentially unhelpful patterns of thinking or repetitive patterns of thinking. Now, through the process of meditating, we're engaging in something called metacognition. So while through the default mode network activity, or if we're not focusing or paying attention to anything, we may be getting caught up in our thoughts. Through the process of engaging in meditation, we are paying attention to our thoughts. We are thinking about thinking. We are being aware of our feelings. We are being aware of our moods. We are being aware of our desires. And this observing our thinking is called metacognitive awareness. And metacognitive awareness has been shown to decrease rumination and ruminative thinking, which again, as we were saying, is very closely tied to symptoms of depression. Mindfulness activities, as a matter of default, tend to increase and improve metacognitive awareness. And of course, this makes sense because when we are engaging in a meditation, for example, and we notice our attention wander and bring our attention back to a point, or we pay attention to our thoughts, feelings, and emotions as they come up, we are engaging in metacognition. So we are training this metacognitive awareness. And metacognitive awareness is associated with better mental health. The next thing I want to talk about is self-compassion. So self-compassion is essentially what it sounds like. It's being compassionate or being a friend to ourselves. It's treating ourselves in a way that is kind. Now, self-compassion has been shown to be protective against anxiety in a whole range of people. And a particularly interesting example is that in returned war veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq, individuals who have higher levels of self-compassion are seen to be less likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder in the 12 months following. So even though these individuals have been exposed to the same level of trauma and the same level of stress, they're less likely to develop poor mental health if they have this high level of self-compassion. It tends to buffer or protect against stressful events. And one study shows this really well. In a sample of young people 13 to 18 years old who have high levels of depression symptoms at baseline, and they're engaged in a social stressor test, which is a public speaking test, those individuals who have higher levels of self-compassion are shown to have decreases or less increases in self-reported levels of stress in response to this task, this public speaking task. They tend to have lower levels of anxiety symptoms related to the public speaking task, and they report having higher levels of life satisfaction. And very interestingly, these individuals also show lower increases in systolic blood pressure in response to the stressful task. Now, this is fascinating because, again, it shows that individuals who have high levels of self-compassion tend to have a smaller stress response in reaction to a stressor or a stressful event that they encounter. So the take-home message essentially is that too much stress can lead to mental health problems through a whole range of factors, one of which is the persistent increase in stress hormones that can damage brain regions involved in the regulation of mood and emotion. And mindfulness practices like meditation and yoga can reduce stress through or can reduce our reactivity to stress, and this can also improve mental health. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much. We do apologize to our international audience across that there was a slight delay or a lag in the videos probably, but the audio was crystal clear, and I think Michaela has beautifully explored the impact of stress on mental health and the influence of mindfulness and physical activity and exercise on the brain and well-being. Her take-home message has been very clearly, very succinct for us, especially in these times, because the word stress has become a very common parlance, and especially in these times of the pandemic, where situations, people have been affected in a myriad of ways, it is vitally important for us to realize how this holistic approach is going to protect, and how this approach is going to focus on the mind body, and in fact mind body and soul connection, and that makes us who we are. And that like Michaela said, there are a whole range of factors, and one of which is that persistent increased stress hormones that can damage the brain regions involved in the regulation of mood and emotion. And mindfulness practices like meditation and yoga can and does reduce stress through all the activity reductions and improves our overall mental health. So it's a brilliant tool for positive mental health. And finally, I think we're doing well with our timekeeping as well. So thank you to both the speakers till now. And finally, we move to our last presentation by Professor Varambally, who is going to talk on the meditation and mental health and the mechanisms and the caveats. And Professor Varambally is going to take us through some very, very practical tips. So ladies and gentlemen, please be very focused towards this last leg of our presentation, because you will get some golden tips from none other than Dr. Shivarama from NIMHANS. Over to you, Professor Varambally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajashree. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night to people all over the world. What is important is my job has been made easier by the two speakers before me, so I thank both of them. I thank the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation for giving me an opportunity to talk to a large audience all over the world. What I'm going to try and do now is share with you. Let me see if I can share my slide. Yes, okay. So I'm basically going to talk about what they have already explained in terms of what mindfulness and meditation does. I'm going to talk a bit about how it possibly does this. Michaela did, of course, go into some of the details, for example, the stress hormone cortisol and what happens to it during stress. And we have shown in research at NIMHANS that cortisol is the first hormone to respond when you do yoga and meditation. And most yoga studies report that there is an immediate reduction of cortisol, which means stress is no longer affecting the human body. As Dr. Rajashree said, stress is not something always negative. Somehow in the modern context, stress has become a bad word or a negative word. Stress doesn't really mean anything. Now, if you look at the granddaddy of stress, that is Hans Selye, he said stress is not what happens to the body, but how we take it. So it all depends on what you do when you think you get stressed. So let me see. Okay. So what we're talking about when we're talking about meditation is this last three elements of the Ashtanga Yoga of Sage Patanjali, who actually was the person who codified yoga into a recognizable specialty by itself. And of course, the asanas and the pranayama are the most well-known all over the world, but the dharana, dhyana, and samadhi are the meditative or the introspective aspect, what are called as Antaranga Yoga, which is the yoga of going inside rather than the first five, which are called as Bahiranga Yoga, which is the yoga of the outside. So what is meditation? I won't go into too much of details, but effectively it is turning inside, an act of inward contemplation which fluctuates between attention to a particular stimulus and complete absorption. Right. Now, it may be primarily grouped into two prototypes: open monitoring, which is the typical mindfulness which Erica and Michaela have spoken to us today about, and focused attention, which is the concentrative form of meditation. And there are many other proposed categories such as contemplative, automatic transcending, and a recent taxonomy based on primary cognitive mechanisms has talked about dividing all meditation into attentional, constructive, or deconstructive. Conceptual basis, of course, most of it comes from Buddhist or yoga texts, and the basic concepts I would like to clarify here that when we say yoga, it always includes meditation. Yoga without mindfulness or meditative experience is just exercise. So when we say yoga, when you say yoga and meditation, sometimes people think yoga is different and meditation is different. It is not. All yoga is meditative. So the primary conceptual basis are that there is a movement from the gross body to the subtler parts of the human mind. And there are three phases which have been described, which you develop concentration, you experience tranquility, and then you gain insight. And there is also a concept of slowing down and expanding your awareness. For example, Patanjali describes dharana as deshabandhas chittasya dharana, which basically means there is a single stream of continuous thought without interruption directed at a particular target. Whereas dhyana goes ahead and then almost becomes one with the target, and samadhi is that state where you achieve oneness without any dichotomy. So these are the descriptions as in the various traditional texts, but today my topic primarily is what are the possible mechanisms. Now we know that, for example, if people meditate for years together, what happens? Sarah Lazar's paper from 2005 was the first important paper which talked about increased cortical thickness in people who meditate in the long term. And there is a recent paper from 2015 which also shows that, as you know, all of us, as we age, we have atrophy of the brain. Our brain becomes smaller and smaller. If you take a CT scan of a 70-year-old person and a 20-year-old person, even a layman can tell the difference, simply because there is more air and less brain. Whereas in people who do long-term practice of yoga and meditation, this atrophy does not happen at that level. It's very much lesser, as you can see in the graph there. How does this happen? Basically, we are protecting the brain by training. So if we need to understand very importantly, what is the current understanding of brain functioning? When we were all medical students, we were told, once the brain suffers damage to a particular part, that's it, nothing happens. The brain cannot change. Whereas now we know that the brain is a terrifically plastic organ, and sometimes structurally but functionally there is a lot of scope for the brain to change function from one part to the other. And what we know now, our areas are not so important as circuits. There are circuits in the brain for everything. We laugh, there is a circuit for laughter, for happiness, for sadness, for everything that we do. It's a circuit, it's not a single brain area. Even speech, although Broca's area we know is for speech, unless the other parts of the circuit are working, you cannot really speak. So it's not like a human brain. Many people compare the two, but the essential difference is the brain cannot have metacognition. It cannot think that, okay, one part of my computer, the structure is not working, let me change the function. Maybe in the future they will, but right now the human brain can do much more and much more flexibly than a computer. So that's what we need to understand. And the concept of what we now call as neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to change and recover and repair itself, was given by one of the pioneers in this area was Donald Hebb, who is the father of neuropsychology, and his famous Hebb's law said neurons that fire together, wire together, and neurons that are out of sync lose their length. This really is the basis of our ability to rewire our brains, which of course then changes our behavior, our mood, and our thoughts. Now, how do we train the brain? Yoga, again, I emphasize that yoga always includes meditation, and saying that, yoga without meditation is like, I like to give the example of physics without mathematics. Is essentially the same thing. Of course, yoga is not the only thing that makes this training better. You can have other things like intermittent fasting, newer experiences, learning a new skill at whatever age you are, involved reading where you forget yourself in what you are reading. It has to be at that level that you forget yourself. Now, Deshmukh, who is one of the people who have delved deep into the mechanisms of meditation, talks about a state called as the Turiya, or the fourth state of awareness or consciousness. We all know the three states, which is the waking stage, the dream stage, and the sleep stage. The fourth stage is where you are awake, but you do not react to situations based on the external world. That is the state which the ancients said called as Turiya, and it takes years of meditation to come to such a state. It involves all the ability to be creative, self-absorptive, vigilant, but not react unnecessarily to situations. That is the fourth stage of awareness called as Turiya. And if you look at some of Dr. Deshmukh's, this is a slide that he was happy to send me. This is his slide. So what he talks about, which are the areas in the brain which take care of these things. As you can see, when a person achieves samadhi, he or she is actually able to sort of control the higher parts of the brain, but basically almost be in a state of complete non-reactivity. You do things, but not necessarily as a knee-jerk reaction to anything. That's the secret of being in samadhi. Some studies from NIMHANS, this is a very simple study of people doing chanting Om and what happens to their brain when they're doing that. And it seems that the limbic areas, which are the areas of our brain which are involved with particularly the negative emotions, anger, greed, lust, and those kind of things, actually calm down during a simple practice of Om meditation. This is just chanting Om for 20 or 30 seconds. And if this can produce this much change in the brain, imagine what will happen if you do it for years together. So this is another way of looking at the brain's ability to inhibit unnecessary responses, what we call as cortical suppression, tested through transcranial magnetic stimulation. And as you can see in this slide, people with depression, the pink one at the left hand corner, have a very low ability to stop things which are unnecessary. The filter is not working, the mental filter. So you get rumination, you get unnecessary thoughts which you can't go away from. And then you look at normal people who are here in the right extreme corner, the orange one, we want to be there. Depressed people are very low. Walking does not really change much. As you can see with yoga, this is just 5 sessions of yoga. You started moving towards the normal ability to suppress what Patanjali refers to as chitta vritti nirodha. Ability to control the oscillations of the mind is shown through this cortical suppression. This is another study we did in the elderly. Of course, it's a very small sample, but as you can see, there was an actual increase in the gray matter of the hippocampus, which is the critical area for memory. This is in 60 or 70-year-old people. If they can have a change in their brain like this, what happens if you start doing yoga at 20 in the rest of your life, you can just imagine. This is a fairly recent paper, again by Sarah Lazar's group, showing that yoginis, basically female elderly practitioners of yoga, have increased cortical thickness, particularly in the left prefrontal cortex. This left prefrontal cortex is the most important area for executive function. How we handle what we do on an everyday basis, as you can see, it's possible that it is simply that they did not atrophy at the level that the other control group did. So this all goes to show that meditation over a long period of time trains our brain, and the circuits which are really critical remain strong. So as Dr. Erika and Dr. Michaela said, there are now been meta-analysis that have established that mindfulness-based therapies can reduce anxiety and depression. Different techniques have shown, including in patients with schizophrenia, but there are some reports which have suggested precipitation of psychotic episodes by intense meditation practices. So towards the last part of my presentation, I would be talking about do's and don'ts in patients with mental health issues, particularly yoga and meditative techniques. For example, let me take depression, the most common disorder first. What you should really do is have energizing and activating practices such as Surya Namaskar, Sun Salutation, open up the chest, have more of back bends, have fast breathing practices to activate like Bhastrika, Kapalbhati, right nostril breathing, and loud mantra chanting. What is not so good is very advanced meditative practices and very slow practices. It's not possibly the best for people with depression. Now look at other area, major area where we have worked. I'm a psychiatrist who works in the area of severe mental illness, so this is my primary area of interest. What you should really do, it has to be a safe and calm location. They have to have sufficient warm-up, easy practices, but performed intensely. A simple Surya Namaskar done fast change of postures, synchronized with dynamic breathing. You can do jogging, twisting poses, dynamic Surya Namaskar, fast yoga breathing, loud mantra chanting. The periods of relaxation should ideally be very brief and with eyes open. Do not try to teach meditative techniques which involve sense organ withdrawal and internalization of awareness. For example, Vipassana may not be the best for people with schizophrenia, and same goes for guided imagery such as Yoga Nidra. This could actually make them look inward and worsen their symptoms. Again, maintenance of a yoga posture for a very long period, closing their eyes, is not a good idea for patients with schizophrenia. On the other hand, people with anxiety, again, an extremely common disorder. Gentle, relaxing practices of mild to moderate intensity are fantastic. Something like Jacobson's progressive muscular relaxation. The equivalent in yoga is called as, instant relaxation or deep relaxation techniques. You can also have practices which involve slow and deep breathing. For example, the Mount pose breathing, left nostril breathing, not the right nostril. Cooling breaths, Shitali, humming breath, Bhramari, and of course Shavasana with deep abdominal breathing. Please avoid fast breathing practices such as Kapalbhati and Vastrika. They could increase the anxiety, and please avoid high intensity practices. OCD, another common disorder. What is good is regulated breathing and mental relaxation, left nostril breathing, and practices of mild to moderate intensity interspersed with deep relaxation. What is not so good, we should not specify the exact number of times. People are already worried about did I do it correctly, did I do it the exact number of times. Sequence is not so important. Instructions can be very relaxed and more general. Finally, in children, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and autism, interactive group practices are extraordinarily good for these children, where each child has to contribute and they work with each other. Chanting in chorus along with everybody else. Interesting breathing practices like animal breathing, dog, rabbit, is very interesting for children. Please encourage imitation. This activates the mirror neurons in the brain, which are the main issue in patients, especially with autism, same with schizophrenia. Not a good idea to change frequently in terms of postures and arrangements. Not a good idea to teach complex practices. Children become bored very quickly, or very slow-paced practices. This is a recent book. I'm not trying to pump this book, but why I'm bringing this up is that what I said today, most of these do's and don'ts are covered in this book released by the Indian Psychiatric Society. It gives a hint about yoga for mental and neurological health care. So coming to the end, I would like to say positive mental health through meditation or any other way is a matter of training and strengthening this brain network that you want to see stronger. Luckily for us, brain is an excellent trainee, and neuroplasticity is possible in all of us, whether we are 17 or 70. Yoga and meditation is one of the most systematic methods of training the body. This is not said by me, this is said by, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is the author of Flow Psychology. He said this in his book, Flow. I would like to, of course, acknowledge all the people who have helped us do the work that we have, the collaborators and the NIMHANS team led by the inspiring Professor Gangadhar. And thank you very much. Hope it was useful. Namaste.
Thank you, Professor Varambally, for your very lucid, very precise explanations of a huge topic. Because you tried to cover something that research started probably 5,000 years ago through our ancient Vedic scriptures, our texts, and of course we realize, Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, and how that has now been conceived in a much more systematic way for the whole world to understand. And the Western literature has accepted this. So it's a merger, it's a bridge, it's a coming together of two the ancient and the modern world. And this is where we need to be, because we need to understand that we are living in a very fast world pace. However, all the modern things are not maybe there. It's just because it's ancient doesn't mean we don't practice them. We must learn from them, adapt them, use them with a clear conscience. So it's a beautiful coming together of the Patanjali's yoga science and the modern scientific scriptures, texts that we've described, with the updated information from the NIMHANS team. So thank you to Professor Gangadhar sir as well, and of course to you, sir, for beautifully bringing these together. Now, this webinar has been very interesting. We've received many questions, and I will start focusing on the questions now. Unfortunately, we may or may not have the time to take all of them, but we will try our very best. So Erica, since you've started this great show for us today, I'd come to you first. There's a question from one of our audience and says, I use a meditation application, but I'm not able to focus or feel the way it is described in an app. What is the problem here? Erica, would you mind give us some, apps are a huge way forward in this fast world. What's the best tip that you have?
Yeah, and I think apps can be really helpful to help people focus if they're new to mindfulness or meditation. But I think the key here is that meditation is a practice. It takes practice. So it is something that you need to make a habit and a daily practice. And even if it's 1 to 2 minutes a day, taking that time out, it is not something that's going to happen overnight. But also, your mindfulness practice can change from day to day. Some days you can be more focused than others. So kind of being easy on yourself is part of meditation and the mindfulness practice. So remembering that key component of non-judgment and self-compassion. So all of that, again, takes practice as well. So that is my advice, is to keep practicing, keep trying it each day, whether it's, again, 1 to 2 minutes. But it's something that's going to be a different experience from person to person, and then maybe from day to day.
Well, thank you, Erica. So, of course, apps are a great way, but as you said, we have to understand the mechanisms of using it and practice, practice, practice. It's the key. Whether it's a kindergarten child learning to with their vowels and their letters and their numbers, or whether it's us at this middle ages trying to understand and use meditative practices. Great. Professor Varambally, there's a question which is a lot of it related to your presentation as well, some of it. How do I know if I am in samadhi or in deep meditation, sir? So could you highlight on this topic, please?
Basically, you should be able to be responsive to the outer world, but at the same time, not perturbed by it. It is not that when you are meditating, you are in a world of yourself, you lose track with the outside world. If something happens on the outside, you should be able to be aware of it. That's still a component, but you are not bothered by it, nor are you excessively worried about things. So the thoughts do not disturb what you are trying to do. You are aware of it. There may be a sound going on, there may be something else going on, but you are focused on what you are thinking about. Single thought. Dharana is that. Dhyana is the next stage where you almost merge with the thought and there is an expansion of awareness around that thought. And in samadhi, you don't need a thought. You are the thought, there is nothing else. So that stage is very difficult for most of us, whereas dharana and dhyana is entirely possible in the world that we live in, even though there might be a lot of disturbances. If you can only focus on one thing without letting any other thoughts come, you are in meditation.
Thank you, Professor. I really like what you said. In the final stages, you are the thought and nothing else. So that is what we have to start striving to, that, you are the thought. You're merged with this pure consciousness and you are part of this pure consciousness. Nothing beyond, nothing less. So feel that, that freshness, that expansion, that you are one in this whole universe, and that actually helps us. That really helps us to reduce a lot of the little frustrations. We get tied into knots a lot of the times in our day-to-day world, thinking the grudges. When we're talking about compassion, we talked about gratefulness, forgiveness. They're just not just words. They are something that are meant to be followed, meant to be realized, meant to be felt and practiced every day. So, Professor, thank you. And I must say, that book of yours is absolutely marvelous. And I would really recommend the audience to actually grab a copy of Professor Varambally's book on the yoga, the science of yoga, because that's what we need to understand. So, and we can see a copy of it displayed on your desk, sir, if that is right, as well.
Yes,
Just behind you, we can see a copy of this book.
yes.
It's a very new publication, and that would be really nice to have a read, because it explains why yoga and meditation is so important and links the 5,000-year-old science with the modern scientific literature. Erica, I have a question for you, and a very important question for many of us, including myself, probably. Does mindfulness help in weight loss? Millions in pounds, dollars and pounds all over the world are, used for diets and X and Y and Z. Let's not go into this, but we still struggle. Do we have a tip from you, ma'am?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely not a direct link. Mindfulness does not equal weight loss, unfortunately. But practices such as mindful eating and goal setting, like I talked about earlier, are proven to help with weight loss. So just the practice of being aware of what you're eating, why you're eating what you're eating. So are there emotions tied to that? If you're really practicing mindful eating, and there are steps to that as well. So that is also on purpose in the present moment. A lot of us are kind of wrapped up emotionally with what we're eating, or we're multitasking. And so a lot of that can really add to weight gain. But goal setting is another important part of that. And that's an awareness as well. Where am I now? And accepting where you are now. So that's a key part as well. I think a lot of us are striving to lose the weight first before we accept where we currently are. And that's where the mindfulness comes in. So I definitely think it's a mechanism, but not a cause and effect.
Okay. So I'll take that one from you as well, Erica. And probably something's not working somewhere for me. So I'll have to come back to you on that. Right. Right. Okay. Professor Varambally sir, I have another question, and this is something of a very sad question, because we are all going through this pandemic, and truly there is not one person in this world who has not lost a neighbor or a friend or a relative or someone that you know of in this pandemic, and it has affected us. It has affected us as professionals as well, because the way we've seen this happening across. So there are quite a few questions on this topic. I'll just read out a couple of them for you. I lost my mother due to COVID recently. Please suggest how can I deal with the loss? No one is giving me any solution. Our condolences to yourselves, whoever's put this question. And there's another question on this COVID-19 infection. I have having memory loss after the COVID-19 infection. Can you please suggest some meditation to help my condition? Though they are both related to COVID, one is much more related to uncertainties of life and bereavement, and the second one is much more to the neurobiological manifestations of COVID or the neuropsychiatric manifestations of COVID. So if you could answer both of these questions for our audience, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has played with our minds, everybody, all of us. But the first question regarding losing somebody is a universal experience. And unfortunately, again, in a lot of cultures, it has been treated as extremely negative. You have lost somebody, so as if, there's nothing, it should not happen. We are all bound to die one day or the other. And although it sounds easy for me to say and for people to do, what we really have to do is to see that person who passed away, not just for the last 1 hour or 1 day or 2 days of their life where they struggled and they lost their life. That is very, very, very unfair to that person. You might have lived with that person for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, even more, or even if it is 5 years. You have to be fair to them. You have to look at the entire time that you spent with them, the good times you had with them, the things you shared with them, and then you get a sense of perspective. The sense of perspective is the real issue when it comes to grief, because all of us lose something. We might lose a girlfriend, we might lose a father, mother, child. Child is the worst, thing. You lose a child before yourself, and it's a terrible thing. But then you look at the 10 years or 12 years or 20 years you spent with your child or your mother. And if you're only looking at the last few days, it's really unfair. You don't want to remember. I wouldn't want to be remembered for what happened in the last 5 days of my life. So I think you need to, what is called as some kind of detachment. Go a step back, look at this person's and your life together. Take the whole life, not just the last part of COVID. And then you would get a sense of perspective. That's the only thing that is going to be able to give you a sense of satisfaction that you did spend so much of your life with that person, and what are the good times you shared together. So it has to be balanced. The view of that person has to be balanced. That's the advice I can give you. The second question is even more relevant right now. A lot of people are having neuropsychiatric disturbances after COVID. The most important things to know is that it would get better with time. What you can do to improve it, very importantly, please keep your brain active. The brain needs activity. Like I said in my talk, circuits need activity. You switch off, oh my God, I can't think, I want to sleep. No, that's not a good thing. Please do the things that you can. Keep doing things, maybe yoga, maybe meditation, maybe crossword. I don't know what you like, please do. Brain is like a muscle, it needs exercise. You let it rest, doesn't do any good. So please be active, try to do the things that you can, your memory will surely come back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A very, very positive note. Brain is like a muscle, and I just thought, I sort of, explain to my patients as well. If you have a stroke, you need a physiotherapy. You have to retrain your muscles, and we are so positive. We keep on doing it every day. But if you have a cognitive decline, if you're depressed and stressed, the brain has to be retrained, and that is all the purpose of this. There is a science behind it. There is good evidence behind it. We eat the food that we eat, makes us healthy physically. The meditation, the spiritual teachings, the books, music, creative aspects are the food for our mind and our soul. So we need to cherish those, nourish those, because unless we nourish them, we can't really go forward with them. There are quite a few more questions, but I think we have to start preparing for the close, though it is the last session of the AAYM webinars for this morning or the night, as we say. There has been a specific question on sports, and I wish we had Michaela with us today. But very briefly, I'll try to answer that. When you say that, we need to understand why a sports person becomes nervous. So there are different types of breathing exercises that can be advocated. Professor Varambally already mentioned a few of them in his talk. We can have the main idea is really to take a minute to focus on your breathing. You can do deep breathing, like the diaphragmatic breathing, which has a host of benefits for the body and mind. You can do long exhale breathing, which will help to reduce your anxiety and also help you improve sleeping. You can also do the humming or the Brahmari breathing, because that relieves the stress, the anxiety, the insomnia, enhances your memory and concentration, which is vital for a sports person, and it actually soothes you with a calming and grounding effect. So, on that note, I think we have crossed the time. And I would like to say thank you very much to all our speakers. This is just a start of this big conversation, and we'll be keeping on talking about these issues later on, because this is where we should need to go forward in these times of turbulence, this pandemic. We need to focus on things like yoga and meditation. Speakers, thank you very much. And may I now hand this over to our host for this morning. Thank you. Over to Krishnaji, you're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Rajashree ji, for moderating such an impactful conversation. Thank you, Dr. Shivarama ji, Dr. Michaela ji, and Dr. Erika ji, for enlightening us with precious information. We hope to see you again in our studios. As for our viewers, we thank you for attending the webinar and hope you enjoyed it. For more informative webinars and workshops that are being hosted throughout the month of June, please visit our website, www.aaymonline.org/yogacon-USA. Namaste. Thank you.
you.